How many people in this group are actually interested in working or working in journalism? How many of you are here because you want to be an anchor? Fred runs a news, my first question is going to be for Fred. Fred runs the news division for Hearst Argyle, which is what, 28 stations now?
28. Go ahead.
I got it right.
Here, try in a moment.
We were talking before the session started, and my question to Fred was, if you want to be an anchor, should you go into electronic journalism or journalism? And I would like Fred to talk about the kind of people who Hearst Argyle, which has mid-range and larger markets, and a few small markets. It's a good company to start a career out in. What it is that they look for in an anchor, and is it a misnomer to go into the business because you want to be an anchor?
Well, we, as Richard said, we had 28 stations, the largest in Boston, the #1 news television operation in Boston, and we go all the way down through the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Our smallest market is Monterey, Salinas, California, which is a nice place to live but not to get rich. Mm-hmm. But we do hire on-air people in all of those markets, but in order to work for us, you need to be a reporter, you need to be a journalist, you need to learn how to write, you need to learn the responsibility of what it is you're expected to do. You need to watch television for something other than to see which apprentice is going to get shot that night. You need to listen to the radio. Hi. This is Soledad. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
You need to read a couple of newspapers a day, and generally you need to be informed. And if you think that because of your personality, the charisma that you perceive you have, or your grandparents have told you you have, and your good looks and your charm, that you're going to get plopped into an anchor chair in a television station, I think you're very wrong. It just doesn't work that way. And forgetting the flop sweat episode, you have to be able to think, talk, read, write, be intelligent, and represent the television station.
There are, turned out of the undergraduate and graduate schools, every year in journalism in the United States, more people are graduated than if everybody in electronic journalism who's under contract as a producer, a director, an associate producer, an on-air, or an anchor were all fired on June 30th. They couldn't employ everybody graduating from school that year. So I think something interesting, that's a statistical truth, something interesting is if we go down the row and everybody shows you what paying dues and the School of Hard Knocks is, a quick version of everybody's resume.
Well, first of all, thanks for depressing all of us. Yeah, I happen to believe in, coming up from the very small markets. I worked in Reno, Nevada, was my first TV job, where you make a lot of mistakes, and trust me, you don't want to make those mistakes in New York, the mistakes that I made in Reno. I worked in Reno for a couple of TV stations. I was a weekend anchor at one of the stations. I ran my own teleprompter. I was the producer, the reporter, the anchor. We'd hit the commercial break, and I'd be in on the director. What time did we hit that break? Okay, I'm out like a mad woman doing the math, trying to figure out what time. I was the producer. I went to Birmingham. I was there for a couple of years, and then I spent a decade in Dallas, Texas as a morning and noon anchor. But I was in the trenches for 15 years before I made it to the network. And I never aspired to the network. I never was one of those people who said, I want to be a network anchor, and I want to be, I was never like that. I was very happy where I was before I came to
Did you
CBS
work as a reporter before you had
Absolutely.
your first anchor job?
Oh, without a doubt. I was a weekend reporter, which is not just a reporter. The weekend reporter, we have to dig up your own stories. And in Birmingham, I had to cover the Klan rallies, and needless to say, I wasn't welcome there.
An ethnic day parade.
Right, yes, right. Yeah, I was a weekend reporter, and then I became a weekend anchor. But being a weekend anchor, realized you still report 3 days out of the week. And I did that for a number of years. But I have to agree with what Fred and what Richard say. You know, people know as an anchor if you don't know what you're talking about. And the way to know what you're talking about is to be well informed and to know what's news. And the way you know what's news is starting out as a reporter.
Resume, Pat.
You have to love the news. I grew up in Canada and started my career there in radio, which is a tough business, and I think increasingly there are fewer opportunities to make a move from radio to television. But it was a great opportunity for me because you take away all of the production elements of television and really focus on delivery and content in radio. And it was a good way to start. I did that for a couple of years, managed to get into an operation that was AM, FM, and television all under the same roof, and sort of slid my way over to the television side in Edmonton, Alberta from there, and did that for many years, reporting, anchoring, assignment editor, newsroom manager, similar to the experience that Renee had where you just had to do it all, and especially if you were doing an 11 o'clock newscast on a Saturday night, you were the newsroom at that point. And you made all the editorial decisions and brought it together to put it on TV. Came to New York 8 years ago now, and over that time have had various jobs within Time Warner, now at New York One and at CNN.
How long did it take you to become an anchor in New York?
It was a course of about a year from the time I came in through an unusual channel with Time Inc. and the magazines. They were trying to convert print content into internet and television content, and I managed to be in the right place at the right time.
So the importance of writing is so significant in the transference from print to television.
Yeah, as I said, if you don't have an interest in journalism, that's going to show up at some point.
Absolutely.
Jane.
My first job was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I just, like you guys, did everything. I was a reporter, and at that point I also had to shoot my own stuff, which was really fun because you'd shoot your own stand-up. So you'd set the camera on a tripod, you'd imagine where your head was going to be, and then you'd run around, you'd turn it on, you'd run around to the other side, and you'd do your stand-up, and sometimes the camera would start to slip, and you'd look at it and go, oh my God. But I did a noon newscast there, and I produced the 6 o'clock newscast 3 nights a week, and I anchored on the weekends, and I also did a talk show. And I was the only woman they had in their newsroom, so I kind of did everything because they had to be represented by that. And then I went from there to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and from where I anchored the evening news, and from there I came to New York. I got lucky because I came to New York at a very young age. I've worked for WNBC for 24 years. And I'm only 16, so I don't know what that happened. But when I got here, I was hired as a reporter, and I also anchored the evening news, and on the weekends. And I remember when I did that, I literally didn't have a day off because inevitably the story I was covering during the week would extend into the weekends and into Monday and Tuesdays, which was my days off, and I would work. I remember at the end of a couple of years, I had so many days off coming to me, they told me I couldn't work for a month because you literally just, that's what it is, and that's how hard you work. But I love it. I've enjoyed everything I've ever done. So,
Soledad.
I've never worked in a small market. I started in Boston at a TV station right outside where I was going to university, but I did the smallest job ever. My first job was literally as an intern removing staples from the bulletin board when people have ripped things down but the staples remain. I literally took the staple remover and pulled those out of the bulletin board. Then I became a PA, and because I've been pre-med, I worked with a medical correspondent, and I was her coffee fetcher, and I opened her mail and answered her phone, essentially. Then after doing that, I became a regular PA for the newsroom, became a writer trainee, and then an associate producer, became a line producer, and I was terrible, and the only instruction I ever got when I was a line producer was, don't go to black. I knew that was a bad thing to go to black. Wasn't sure how to avoid it, but I knew it would be a bad thing for my career and just generally if the show went to black somewhere in the middle when it wasn't supposed to. I became a segment producer, and that was something I really loved doing and sort of found my niche there. And when NBC Network was looking for a field producer for the medical correspondent, partly because of my science background, I was tapped to be his field producer. So I went to NBC News as a producer and was there for a couple of years, then went out to San Francisco to start reporting. really love reporting, but I wanted to expand my resume a little bit, and they had a very deep bench of female anchors, and so they made it clear that I wouldn't move forward. So I went to MSNBC was starting at the time. They were looking for a female anchor to do a technology show. Again, my background in science and medicine was helpful, so I started anchoring, which I'd never done at at MSNBC out in San Francisco. They canceled the show about less than 18 months later. And so I was brought back to New York, and I started working out of New York as an anchor on MSNBC Network. And then when the Weekend Today job opened up, I was put in that position and then left Weekend Today about 7 months ago to start at CNN.
Soledad makes an interesting point about getting to San Francisco. 8, 9, 10, 12? About what market?
I think San Francisco at the time, it's either 5 or 6, maybe.
Big
Maybe 6?
market, very big market.
In the earlier years of television, and before the sophistication and before stations realized that the greatest profit margins in a station were actually the news department, you could get a lot of one-man bands and in small cities get the opportunity to do everything. As more and more television stations have put more and more hours on the air, then there are more jobs, significantly more jobs that are not anchor-oriented than those which are oriented. So as the industry has matured and gone to 3 and 4 and 5 hours of news a day, the only place that's really opened up more for anchoring on a proportionate level of employees is cable news and all news 24 hours, which have provided more jobs. And so the degree of difficulty, if anchoring is what you're set on, is tremendous. There's a famous disease in this business. It's called anchoritis. and the truth of the matter is a lot of the people who become anchors in the business, and anybody who wants to comment on it, were people who started out just wanting to be journalists and who, by dint of their work ethic, their writing skill, their instincts to stories, were given the chance or privilege to anchor. And if anybody would like to talk about that.
I completely agree, and I think that there's some of the creepiest people I've ever met are people who aspire to be anchors, because to me, anchor is not really a job. I mean, you're a journalist, and I never wanted to be an anchor. I really had no interest in it. I love reporting. I love producing. I love reporting. The reason I sort of did that, and maybe some agree, was because I thought it would expand my skill set, especially in this day and age where there's so many times that as reporters you were suddenly on the set anchoring even though you weren't actually trained as an anchor. I mean, it's a very different job. I'm always a little worried when I meet young people who sort of say to me, well, I want to be an anchor.
Yeah.
I don't really like to write. Producing doesn't interest me. Certainly don't want to work the prompter, but I want to anchor. And it's like, why? I mean, because to me, anchoring is sort of, you get to bring together all the skills that you've sort of honed over the 15 or so more plus years you've been in the business. So I always think it's a little strange, people whose goal is anchoring.
And is it a misnomer to go into the business because you want to be an anchor?
Well, we, as Richard said, we had 28 stations, the largest in Boston, the #1 news television operation in Boston, and we go all the way down through the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Our smallest market is Monterey Salinas.
How many people in this group are actually interested in working or working in journalism? How many of you are here because you want to be an anchor? Fred runs a news, my first question is going to be for Fred. Fred runs the news division for Hearst Argyle, which is what, 28 stations now?
28. Go ahead.
I got it right.
Here, try in a moment.
We were talking before the session started, and my question to Fred was, if you want to be an anchor, should you go into electronic journalism or journalism? And I would like Fred to talk about the kind of people who Hearst Argyle, which has mid-range and larger markets, and a few small markets. It's a good company to start a career out in. What it is that they look for in an anchor.
As California, which is a nice place to live, but not to get rich. Mm-hmm. But we do hire on-air people in all of those markets. But in order to work for us, you need to be a reporter You need to be a journalist. You need to learn how to write. You need to learn the responsibility of what it is you're expected